Hi, everybody. I'm Anne Marie Hayes, and today we're talking about graduated licensing, particularly in Ontario, but a lot of what we talk about will apply to other provinces and across the border. We're going to do this one a little bit differently. It'll be more of a question and answer format. And I'll talk a little bit about how graduated licensing works in Ontario. There are 3 levels of licensing. The first one is you take a written test and then you get a G1. And when you drive with a G1, you must have a co-driver. We'll talk about what the qualifications are for that a little later. At the end of that time, when you're ready and according to the qualifications, you'll take a road test. If you pass the road test, then you can drive on your own, but with restrictions. And the reason for that really is so that students, teens, new drivers can get accustomed to some of the difficulties of driving before additional difficulties are added. And then at the end of that term, they pass a second road test, and then they become a full G license driver, which allows them to drive anywhere. And it's just the standard vehicle license. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But to make sure we get the right information today, we have 2 great guests here. One is Melissa Brabant from the Ministry of Transportation, and she's going to answer some of the technical questions. And then we also have Eva Giorgio, who is from Serco, which operates Drive Test. And those are the people you go to for all the tests that I just talked about. And so she'll be able to help when it comes to how to get licensed. So that's where we're going to start. Welcome, Melissa and Eva.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eva, we're going to start talking in Ontario about how to get a G1 license, and that is the written test. So where do people who want to become licensed go to write that test?
Well, thanks for the question, Anne-Marie. I would say that we've got 56 sites across Ontario that you can actually do the written test at. In order for you to do that, you actually need to have your proof of your legal name, date of birth, and a signature piece. There's acceptable documents. Some of those could include passports, birth certificates, valid immigration documents. You also must show proof of signature. And this is sometimes difficult for the new drivers because they're looking for that signature piece. Some of the items that you could look at would be a student ID card that has a signature on the back, or if they would like to volunteer their health card to show that. There's also what we call a guarantor form that they could utilize. All of these things would be on our Drive Test website, just in case you're wondering. So they would be at www.drivetest.ca, and all the acceptable identification would be listed there.
Great. Thank you very much. For that test, the written test, do they have to book ahead? And if so, like how far in advance should they book?
Actually, there's no appointment necessary. Depending on the hours of service, each office is different. We have some offices that are opened from 8:30 to 5. There's some offices that are open from 7 to 7. So again, if you check out our website, it'll tell you which offices are available. We suggest to be there at least an hour before closing, so that would give us enough time to process your application and, of course, start give you the time to actually finish the written test.
Any sense of how? I mean, I know people read at different rates and write at different rates. Any kind of ballpark how long it takes to do that test?
Well, the test itself is about 40 multiple choice questions. It's 20 rules of the road and 20 signs of the road. That could probably, if you look at maybe taking about a minute per question or less, would probably be a good ballpark figure. We do have the test available in a multitude of languages as well. So depending on what your comfort level would be, if English is not your strongest language for reading, there are quite a few different languages that we do have available.
Great. That's good information. And again, if they want more information about which languages and that kind of thing, they'd go to the Drive Test website.
Correct. That's right.
So, Melissa, now it comes to you. And how can students prepare for that written test?
Like Eva said, the written or the what we call our knowledge test is made up of rules and signs of the road. So all of these questions are pulled directly from our Ontario's official driver's handbook. So be sure to study that handbook and be familiar with the signs and rules before taking your test. And this book is available from public libraries if you could find it there. You can also purchase the book from different retailers, or you can even view it online at ontario.ca. And the website also provides sample G1 questions to give you an idea of what to expect on a knowledge test. So it's great to prepare ahead of time for that.
That's great. And it's really important to do those practice tests. So not only do you have an idea of what you'll be looking at, but it will also help you get a handle on some of the questions you might be asked so you know the answers. I know that I've seen the handbook in places like Canadian Tire. I've seen it in drugstores, those kinds of places. But to know that people can also look at it online or even download it from the MTO website is very handy and doesn't cost them anything. A G1 driver will be driving with a co-driver. What kind of a vehicle can they drive with that license?
A G1 license holder can drive any Class G vehicle. Remember, as long as that accompanying driver's in the front seat with them and has at least 4 years driving experience. So that means that G1 driver can drive any car, van, SUV, small truck, or combination of vehicle and tow vehicle up to 11,000 kilograms. And that's provided that the vehicle towed is not over 4,600 kilograms. So remember, that's just these types of vehicles. If they want to drive a motorcycle or any other type of vehicle, they would need to apply for that specific license for that vehicle type.
Okay, that's good to know. So, dad's car, mom's car, the van, the SUV doesn't matter within those parameters as long as they obey the rules of that license. When the driver passes that written test and they now have their G1, there are some restrictions that that driver must adhere to in addition to having the co-driver in the car. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Melissa.
G1 drivers have certain restrictions in place, and this is really aimed at helping them to gain the experience that they need to be a safe driver gradually over time. So these restrictions will include zero alcohol or drugs in their system. Not driving alone at any time. We've said that many times today. You have to be accompanied by that fully licensed driver at all times. And again, that accompanying driver must be sober as well. You'll be restricted to avoid driving on 400 series highways, such as the 401, QEW.
Okay, so a G1 driver cannot drive on 400 series highways or named highways like the QEW, the Don Valley highways like that. So, as soon as they get that G2 license, though, they can go right out on the 401, which is not what any parent wants. So, how can a teen get highway experience with a G1?
So remember, there's no highway driving component on the G2 road test, only on the G road test. So once you successfully pass that G2 road test and you become that G2 licensed driver, you will be permitted to drive on all roadways. And this will give you at least that year of highway driving experience before completing your G road test. But as a G1 driver, you are restricted against driving on 400 series highways and so on, like you mentioned. But if you did want to gain that highway driving experience as a G1 driver, you may drive on any roads when accompanied by a certified and licensed driving instructor.
And so I would really recommend that every parent, even if you're going to teach your teen to drive yourself, that you do take advantage of hiring a driving instructor for that piece because merging and getting off a major highway are totally different driving. Driving with cars at those speeds is completely different. Plus, in some cases, you have people on both sides of you driving at high speed. So it's a totally different type of driving. And I would definitely recommend that parents hire an instructor, at least for that piece, but better to take a full beginner driver education program for sure. So we talked about zero tolerance for drugs or alcohol for G1 drivers. And it's really important to understand that a lot of young people who are becoming licensed now are not 16, 17, they're waiting until 18, 19 until they're legal, really of legal age. So if you're out drinking at night and you drink a lot, perhaps binge drinking, the next morning, when you go to drive, even with that co-driver, you may not be zero alcohol. You may not be perfectly sober. So you have to make sure that your alcohol, that there's zero alcohol and zero drugs in your system, even though it may be residual from the night before. I talk in what I do, I talk a lot to parents. And some parents have told me that even before their teen gets their G1, they plan to just take them out in the neighborhood, not very far, just get them used to slow speeds, stopping, starting. Um, what would the ministry say to that? Starting to drive with your teen without that G1 license, Melissa?
What I would say is that there are serious penalties for anyone caught driving without a license in Ontario. Even if you've never been licensed before, if you're caught driving without one, a driving record will be created for you and the offense will be recorded. So there's serious penalties in terms of fines up to $1,000. And these penalties will remain on your driving record. So they can significantly impact insurance rates and even affect your ability to obtain insurance overall in the future.
And I would imagine, and I'm not going to ask you to answer to this, but I would imagine that if there were some kind of a collision while an unlicensed driver was driving that vehicle, there could be some big questions from the insurance company too. So I think it's incredibly unsafe and foolish, and it doesn't take long to get that G1 test done and that license. So don't take that risk. I mean, that would be really foolish. We also talked about a co-driver. When you start to drive with that G1 license, you have to have a co-driver in the car. And so one of the things that I've heard, and I'll address this to you, Melissa, is, this is the greatest thing because now when we go to the Christmas party, my G1 driver is my designated driver. What do you say to that, Melissa?
So, if you're the accompanying driver, you cannot be impaired by drugs or alcohol. And remember that the role of the accompanying driver is to assist the novice driver. So you have to be prepared to take over the driving if needed. So for this reason, they cannot be your designated driver. The accompanying driver cannot be impaired by drugs or alcohol, or even be under a driver's license suspension.
And that can't be high either. I mean, they are there to assist the driver. And so you must be sober if you're a co-driver. So what would the other qualifications be for that co-driver?
With a G1 license, like we said, you cannot drive alone at any time. You have to be accompanied by that fully licensed driver in the front seat. That person can be the only one in the front seat with you while you're driving. And the accompanying driver needs to have a Class G license or higher, or an equivalent driver's license from another jurisdiction with at least 4 years of driving experience. And again, just a reminder, the accompanying driver must be sober and not impaired by drugs or alcohol.
So if for example, the parent who would be the co-driver has experience driving, but in another country, would they still qualify?
Yeah, so the accompanying driver can have driving experience from outside of Canada as long as it's reflected on their Ontario driving record at the time they exchanged their out-of-province license to an Ontario driver's license. And on your Ontario license, if you have a look at the bottom, you'll see 4 black dots on the front of your license, and this would indicate that you would qualify as the accompanying driver.
Okay, so that also eliminates perhaps In some cases, an older brother or sister who's only had their license for maybe a year or two.
That's right.
They would not qualify as a co-driver.
Not without that 4
Not
year
without the
license
4 dots,
experience.
and that's how
Correct.
you can be sure that that person qualifies. Let's say that family now with a G1 driver wants to go on a road trip. And I know everybody's kind of dying to go somewhere now, especially. So, road trip G1 driver, maybe across Canada or maybe across the border into the United States. Can that G1 driver drive outside of Ontario?
They can, however, your novice license restrictions will still apply when you are outside of Ontario. So you're really, that novice driver is responsible for ensuring that they comply even with the laws of that jurisdiction where they're driving. So remember that not all road signs and traffic laws are the same. They really do vary from province to province. So just be aware of their laws in that area that you're driving. And if you are caught of a driving related offense in another Canadian province or even the state of New York or Michigan, those demerit points will be added to your driving record just as if the offense were to take place in Ontario. So that's important to keep in mind as well.
Okay, thank you. And then at the end of the G1, there is a road test. And that is called either the G1 exit test or the G2 test. Most young people call it the G2 test. Driving instructors call it the G1 exit test. So, back to Eva. Can you talk a little bit about the procedure to get that test?
Okay, thanks for the question, Anne Marie. The person can actually apply for the road test after 1 year completion of the knowledge test. So that's when they've originally applied for the license. At that point in time, they would have paid their fees for what we call now a G2 road test. They would have to wait a minimum of 1 year unless they went through a driver approved training course. That's through the Ministry of Transportation. Then they're eligible to do that 8 months after their knowledge test. So, once, depending on if they've gone through the education course or not, they would be qualified to do their road test. They could go on to drivetest.ca to book their appointment. Their fees are covered once they applied for the original application and their knowledge test for their first driving test.
I don't think a lot of people know that. That's great.
So then at this point, once they've scheduled their appointment, they can do their road test at any one of our 56 locations. We currently also have 9 offsite locations that we are completing road tests at, as well as travel points. We have 39 travel points, but those are scheduled through the main offices. You need to arrive for your road test at least half an hour before your test time. And if you wear corrective lenses for driving, make sure that you have them with you. And make sure that you bring a vehicle that is actually comfortable for you to drive in.
Yeah, it's not the time to take dad's car that you've never driven before. So that because you will be asked to where things are on the car, things like that. The other thing is that the car must be roadworthy, and maybe address that a little bit.
We do a vehicle inspection around the vehicle. So we're looking for uh, signal lights to be working both on the front and the rear of the vehicle. The horn has to be operational, that the brake lights light up in the back. So both the left and the right is important. There is no large cracks or stars in the front windshield from wiper to wiper are some of the things that we look at. The biggest myth is that, well, what happens? Do you have to have a full tank of gas? We don't check the gas. We just need to ensure that you have enough for you to complete your road test at that time.
I will tell you that one time I was at a road test center and this lady came in and she was angry and she stomped into the back where the instructors were. And of course, they're all looking at her saying, "What happened? What happened?" She says, "He ran out of gas." So you really, I would imagine, since you can't complete the test, that that's an automatic fail. So
So
wouldn't it be?
it's well, at this point, it depends on when it stopped And if there was anything worthy on the actual record that would determine whether it would be considered out of order or not meeting ministry transportation standards.
Okay. But yeah, but still, I mean, you don't want to be making your instructor or your tester upset either. So make sure you have enough gas to finish the test.
I think that's a rule of thumb for any type of driving. We always want to have enough gas to make sure that we can get
Yeah,
to the places that we want to be.
absolutely. Oh, yeah. The other question that we get a lot from teens is, and it's usually after the fact when they're annoyed. Um, I got in the car, I've been practicing and practicing, and then the tester said, I can't use my backup camera. Like, what's that about?
Well, that's a great question. The whole purpose of the test is we're here to test your skill set. And part of that is to actually understand how and where you should be looking. What if that camera wasn't functioning that day? You still need to understand how the purpose of you backing into that on your parallel park, backing into that space behind the vehicle. We need to be using our mirrors. We need to be checking our path behind us so that we can actually utilize that. The backup camera is a fantastic feature that we have on a lot of the new vehicles, but we just shouldn't be using that solely. We should still be looking to see where we're going.
Yeah, you can't use it exclusively because although it does allow you to see directly behind the vehicle, it doesn't tell you what's coming in either direction. So you still need to be able to check, as you say, using your mirrors, turning your head to see what's all around you before you start to back up. So when we go to book these tests, and I know that periodically everybody wants to book in the summer, it's their high and low seasons. So if people are having trouble booking, what should they do?
So we do have three options of how you can schedule a road test. You can go through our website, which is drivetest.ca. You can actually come into any location. So that's 56 locations, 39 travel points, or nine offsite locations at this time. Or you can actually use our call center and call in to make an appointment as well. So there's lots of available options for you.
Okay, that's a good tip too, that they can actually call if they can't book online. A lot of young people today prefer to do everything online and never speak to another person. However, sometimes picking up that phone can help you do what you need to do a lot faster. So that's a really good tip too. For that, for the, and I don't know if we've covered this or not, but do they have to book that test, and how far in advance should they book it?
So, as I stated, once you've completed the knowledge test, you would have to wait a minimum of 1 year before you're even eligible to book a road test. So, the license itself is valid for 5 years. You need to be able to complete both your G2 and your G road test within that 5 year mark, as well as do your mandatory wait times. So 1 year from the day that you do your knowledge test is when you're eligible, unless you go through driver's education, which is 8 months. And then once you completed your G2 road test to get your G2 license, you would have to wait a minimum of 1 year before you can apply for your full class license, which is your G class. So you have to keep that in mind, that you've got a 5 year time period to get all of those testing requirements done.
So just to be clear, if I'm coming up to the end of that 1 year and it's going to be, the year will be up in 3 weeks, I can't book now for a test in 3 weeks. I have to wait until I've finished that time frame and then I can book it.
Actually, as long the system will recognize when you're actually eligible for the road test, so you can book it up to 6 months in advance.
Okay, good, good, good. Okay, thanks. That helps. And then what happens if I fail? I take the road test and I fail it for whatever reason.
So if you were unsuccessful and you did not meet the Ministry of Transportation standards, then you would have to reschedule another road test. There are applicable fees that you have to pay prior to booking that road test. It's a minimum of a 10-day waiting period from the test that you were just unsuccessful on until your next appointment or whatever the first available appointment is in your local area.
And I have to wait 24 hours to do that. So I can't walk right back into the office and say, okay, sign me up for another one 10 days out.
That is correct. The system has to wait for at least 24 hours before we can schedule you another appointment.
Okay. And then I just failed the test. Will I have some help in figuring out what I really need to study before I take that test again?
Well, as part of our wrap up with the applicant or the student that is taking the road test, we do give a quick overview of areas that need improving. And then, of course, you can always utilize your score sheet. You can get a copy of your score sheet at inside the office for a record of your examination, and utilize the Ontario Driver's Handbook as some of the features that would help you understand where you went wrong.
Great. That's a really good tip, too. So, do I have to go back in and request that score sheet?
That is correct. At this time, if the road test was completed on a road test tablet, then you would have to come into the office to actually request for a copy of your record of examination.
Which would be a great asset for helping you prepare the things that you're a little bit weak on for retaking that test.
So, just to add to that, Anne Marie, all road test maneuvers, such as 3 point turns, all the parking maneuvers, these are all outlined in the official driver's handbook. So, that is a great way to prepare for your road test. Review that handbook, review the maneuvers and the proper way to complete them. And you can also, like Eva mentioned earlier, is complete that beginner driver education program. There's many courses that can teach you the skills that you need to be a safe driver and meet the requirements of these road tests. And be aware, not all driving schools offer ministry approved driver education courses. There are recognized courses, and you could find the full list of approved courses on our website at ontario.ca.
Great, thank you. And another just a quick point about that is even ones that are listed on the ministry's website, get some recommendations, talk to other people, because if they're on the website, they are in compliance, they offer the same elements, but not necessarily at the same level. And I can say that from experience. So I would suggest people get recommendations. And we did actually do an episode on this as well, about finding a good driving school. Another question about the driver's license is that G1 exit, G2 road test driver passed. And they get that first license, but there's an error on it. Maybe their name is backwards. And plus, we have a lot of um, not John and Mary names today. So there's a mistake, maybe a misspelling, maybe the surname is the last name. But how do we get that corrected?
On their official visit to apply for their application to their G1 knowledge test, their identification is presented to us. We usually do many checkpoints to ensure that that information is correct, but I'm sure there will be sometimes there might be an error. What you would need to do is return back to the drive test location and have them bring back your original documentations that you brought in, and we would do the correction for you at no charge.
Great. And so that should be done right away so that as you proceed through the licensing system, it's correct after that point.
That is correct.
So that's great. Talking about the G2 test, which is the first road test. How long is that test?
So right now, that's a great question, Anne-Marie. Right now, the test is approximately anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes to complete. And as Melissa has stated, there are specific maneuvers that are required, which is a 3 point turn, a grade park is required, as well as a parallel park.
And a grade park means either uphill or downhill.
That is accurate.
All right. And again, going back to the ministry handbook, there are illustrations of how to do those things and step by step instructions. So it's free from the MTO website. It's a great place to pull up some of those requirements and see how to do them. For the G2 test or G2, you've got your G2, you can drive alone. How long can you drive at that level before you must be tested to move on to G?
So once you've successfully passed your G2 license and you now have a G2 standing license, you have to wait a minimum of 1 year before you're eligible to proceed to the next level, which would be your full Class G road test. At that point in time, again, you have to be mindful that when you applied for your knowledge test, you've got a 5 year window that you can complete all the testing within. But the minimum time is at least 1 year from the day that you successfully passed your G2 road test.
Our G2 student is now comfortable. They've done a lot of driving. They've had a lot of practice. They feel they're ready for their full G test. How long is the test?
So they've had, as we stated before, we need to ensure that they've waited their mandatory wait times of at least 1 year from when they actually completed their G2 road test. The actual G road test is approximately 30 minutes in length.
Okay. And then what would be different between the first road test and the second road test?
So with the G class road test, the difference is there's a lot of observation required. There is also highway driving, merging on and off the expressway, lane changes that are expected both in the business areas as well as the expressway or highway areas.
The other one that I wanted to add, the other question that I wanted to ask was about seatbelts. And certainly, if a driver doesn't have a seatbelt on, then there is a big, there it's against the law. But what about other people in the car? You have a G1 or G2 driver, and maybe their brothers and sisters in the back aren't wearing seatbelts. Who gets, like, how does that work?
So great question. In Ontario, all motor vehicle drivers and passengers must wear a seatbelt for every trip. As a driver, you can face fines if you or anyone in the vehicle under the age of 16 is not wearing a seatbelt or is not secured properly in a child car seat. You can be fined anywhere between $200 and to $1,000, and 2 demerit points will be added to your driving record. Remember, these demerit points are there from 2 years from the date of the offense. And as a novice driver, you have specific restrictions on you, one of them being that all passengers must wear seatbelts. So as a novice driver, you would also be suspended for violating those restrictions if caught without that seatbelt on.
And when we say wearing a seatbelt, we mean wearing it properly. Your little brother in the back seat can't flip the shoulder part over to his back because it's uncomfortable. Or two young kids can't buckle up in one seatbelt. It's each person must wear their seatbelt properly. And that also means that the mom in the back seat can't be holding her baby. The baby must be properly secured. And those are all safety rules and with penalties if they're not obeyed.
Yeah, it's also important to realize that even if no one is using this seatbelt, you cannot have a broken seatbelt in the vehicle. So make sure that all seatbelts in the vehicle are in proper working order and are being used when a passenger is in that seat.
When our dog was a puppy, we had her belted with a dog seatbelt in the back of the car. Well, she chewed right through the seatbelt. And of course, we had to replace it, but I'll tell you, it cost a fortune. Secure your pets in different ways in a crate if you have to when they're puppies, because they do like to chew. But it cost a lot.
Absolutely. And Marianne, keep in mind as well, projectiles in general, whether it's a pet, whether it's a passenger, whether it's, tools, all these items that are not secured will act as a projectile in the case of a collision. So absolutely have these things secured properly.
Yeah, and we do have some videos about that too. So at teenslearntodrive.com, there are great videos about securing your pets and securing things in the car and a lot of other topics about driving. All right, so I hope this answered some of the questions that parents have about the graduated licensing system in Ontario, why we have it, and how it all works. Thanks very much, Eva, and thanks, Melissa, for answering a lot of questions. And I may come back to you at some point in the future as parents ask more questions. Um, but it's really important. And I think I'm a very strong proponent of GLS because it's sometimes called GDL, but because it really helps teens become um, accustomed to driving with some restrictions before additional restrictions are added. And drivers need to remember that every time they get in the car, they are responsible not only for the lives of the people in the car, including themselves and their passengers, but also the other people on the road, the vulnerable road users like cyclists, motorcyclists in some cases too, pedestrians, and other people. And over the years, I've had a lot of parents say to me, I think what you do is great, but my daughter is so responsible. I really don't have to worry about her. And if she was driving in a farm field, that would be true. All she has to do is make sure that the vehicle goes in a straight line. But she's not. She's sharing the road with a guy who just realized that's his exit and shoots across 4 lanes on the 401, or the car that stops suddenly in front, or the distracted driver who is heavily moving into her lane. I mean, we share the road with a lot of different people, and driving needs to make drivers aware of how they interact with other people and have a really good foundation. And that's going back to the importance of starting with a good beginner driver education program. And we do have an episode about that. And if parents decide to coach their teens, then there are lots of great resources from Drive Test on how to become licensed, and from the ministry on what the rules and regulations are, and a lot of great tips there too. So thank you very much, Melissa and Eva. And that's the end of this episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.